What happens when a reality TV star walks into one of daytime television's most unpredictable hot seats and finds herself face to face with a host who refuses to hold back? The View's stage became the setting for one of the most explosive moments in recent talk show history, when Kyle Richards sat down for what was supposed to be a lighthearted conversation about her life, her career, and her latest ventures. But within minutes, the atmosphere shifted from cordial to confrontational, and what followed was a masterclass in tension that had the studio audience gasping, the co-hosts scrambling, and viewers at home unable to look away. This wasn't your typical celebrity interview gone slightly off the rails. This was something else entirely. A moment where two strong personalities collided, where questions became accusations, where answers turned into defenses, and where the line between professional discourse and personal attack blurred so dramatically that it ended with Kyle Richards doing something almost unheard of on live television. Before we get into exactly what was said that made everything spiral out of control, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and drop a comment below telling me what you think really happened here. Now let's break down every single moment of this interview. The segment started innocently enough. Kyle took her seat at the table, exchanging pleasantries with the hosts. Whoopi Goldberg opened with a warm welcome, mentioning Kyle's long run on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills and her various business projects. The other co-hosts chimed in with friendly comments, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed perfectly normal. Kyle talked about her family, her daughters, and some of the projects she's been working on outside of reality television. She was relaxed, smiling, engaging with each host as they asked their questions. The audience was responsive, laughing at the right moments, applauding when appropriate. It was shaping up to be exactly the kind of segment producers love, the kind that generates positive buzz and friendly social media clips. But then Joy Behar leaned forward. Anyone who watches The View regularly knows that when Joy leans forward with that particular expression, something interesting is about to happen. She had been quieter than usual up to this point, letting the other hosts carry the conversation, but now she clearly had something on her mind. Her opening question seemed simple enough on the surface. She asked Kyle about some of the controversies that had emerged over the past season of her show, specifically about how certain situations had been portrayed and whether Kyle felt the editing had been fair to everyone involved. Kyle's demeanor shifted slightly. Her smile became a bit more fixed, her posture a touch more defensive. She gave a diplomatic answer, explaining that reality television is complicated, that editing is part of the process, and that she trusts the producers to tell compelling stories. Joy wasn't satisfied with that response. She pressed further, asking Kyle to address specific incidents, specific accusations that had been made by other cast members, specific moments that viewers had questioned. Kyle attempted to deflect, saying that she didn't want to rehash old drama, that she preferred to focus on moving forward, but Joy persisted. She brought up names, mentioned specific episodes, referenced social media reactions. The other hosts exchanged glances. Whoopi tried to interject with a lighter question, clearly sensing that the energy was shifting into uncomfortable territory, but Joy continued. She pointed out inconsistencies in Kyle's public statements versus what had aired on the show. She questioned why Kyle had responded to certain situations the way she had. She asked whether Kyle thought she had any responsibility for the way relationships had fractured. Kyle's responses became shorter, more clipped. She defended herself, explaining context that viewers might not have seen, pointing out that hours of footage gets condensed into minutes of television. She said that it's easy to judge from the outside but much more complicated when you're living through it. Joy countered every explanation. She brought up interviews that Kyle had given to other outlets where she had said different things. She mentioned comments from other housewives that contradicted Kyle's version of events. She asked pointed questions about loyalty, about honesty, about whether Kyle felt she had been a good friend to the people she claimed to care about. The audience had gone quiet now. This wasn't fun television anymore. This was uncomfortable. This was personal. Sarah Haynes attempted to redirect the conversation, asking Kyle about her positive experiences on the show, about the friendships that had endured, about the opportunities that had come from her platform. Kyle seemed grateful for the reprieve and launched into a more upbeat response. She talked about the women she had bonded with, the charitable work she had been able to promote, the way the show had allowed her to connect with viewers. But Joy wasn't done. As soon as Kyle finished her answer, Joy jumped back in. She asked why, if Kyle valued these friendships so much, she had allowed certain situations to escalate the way they had. She questioned whether Kyle's actions matched her words. She suggested that perhaps Kyle was more interested in creating dramatic television than in maintaining genuine relationships. Kyle's face flushed. Her voice rose slightly as she responded, insisting that Joy didn't know what she was talking about, that Joy wasn't there, that Joy didn't understand the full picture. Joy fired back, saying that millions of people watch the show every week and they can see exactly what happens, that Kyle's behavior is documented and broadcast for everyone to analyze. Kyle argued that edited television doesn't show everything, that conversations happen off camera, that relationships are more nuanced than what makes it into a 40-minute episode. Joy asked why viewers should believe Kyle's version of events when what they see with their own eyes tells a different story. The tension at the table was palpable now. Sunny Hostin tried to calm things down, suggesting that perhaps both perspectives had validity, that reality television is inherently complicated. But Joy and Kyle were locked in now, barely acknowledging anyone else. Joy brought up a specific incident from the most recent season, one that had generated significant controversy online. She described the situation in detail, asking Kyle to explain her choices in that moment. Kyle insisted that the situation had been misrepresented, that important context had been left out, that if people knew the full story, they would understand why she had reacted the way she did. Joy asked why Kyle hadn't clarified this before, why she had let people believe something that wasn't true. Kyle said she had tried, that she had spoken about it in interviews, that some people simply didn't want to hear her side. Joy suggested that maybe the problem wasn't that people didn't want to hear Kyle's side, but that Kyle's side didn't make sense. Kyle's jaw tightened. She said that she didn't appreciate being called a liar on national television. Joy responded that she hadn't called Kyle a liar, she had simply pointed out inconsistencies. Kyle shot back that calling something inconsistent was just a polite way of saying someone wasn't telling the truth. Whoopi tried again to intervene, proposing that they take a commercial break, but the producers must have decided that this was too compelling to interrupt because the cameras kept rolling. Joy continued, asking Kyle whether she thought her castmates were lying then, since their accounts of events differed from hers. Kyle said that people remember things differently, that emotions color perception, that what feels true to one person might not be the objective reality. Joy asked how convenient it was that Kyle's version of the truth always seemed to paint her in the best light. Kyle's voice shook slightly as she responded, saying that she had owned her mistakes when she made them, that she had apologized when necessary, that she refused to be vilified for things she didn't do. Joy pointed out specific instances where Kyle had, in Joy's view, failed to take responsibility, where she had blamed others, where she had played the victim. The atmosphere at the table had become absolutely electric. Kyle leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, and said that she found it interesting that Joy seemed to have such strong opinions about situations she had only observed through a television screen. She pointed out that Joy had never been on a reality show, had never had cameras follow her personal life, had never had to navigate friendships, while producers were creating storylines and other cast members were playing to the audience. Joy didn't miss a beat. She responded that she had been on television for decades, that she understood how media worked, and that she also understood the difference between being authentic and performing for the cameras. She asked Kyle directly whether she thought the person viewers saw on The Real Housewives was the real Kyle Richards, or a character Kyle played. Kyle bristled at the question. She said that of course she was being herself, that reality television might be edited, but her emotions and reactions were genuine, that everything viewers saw was really happening, even if the context was sometimes manipulated. Joy pressed harder, asking then why Kyle's behavior on the show often seemed so different from how she presented herself in other contexts, in interviews, on social media, in her business ventures. Kyle argued that people are multifaceted, that she contained multitudes, that it was reductive to expect someone to be exactly the same in every setting. Joy countered that there was a difference between being multifaceted and being inconsistent, between adapting to different environments and fundamentally changing who you claim to be depending on the audience. Alyssa Farrah Griffin attempted to inject some levity, making a joke about how they were all getting very philosophical for a daytime talk show. The audience laughed nervously, grateful for a moment of release from the tension. But Kyle wasn't laughing. She turned to Alyssa and said that this wasn't funny to her, that her integrity was being questioned, that Joy was essentially accusing her of being fake on television. Joy interrupted, saying that she wasn't accusing Kyle of anything, she was asking questions, questions that many viewers had, questions that deserved answers. Kyle said that the way Joy was asking these questions felt like an attack, that there was a difference between journalism and ambush. Joy's eyebrows shot up. She said that if Kyle thought this was an ambush, she clearly hadn't experienced real investigative journalism, that these were softball questions compared to what actual controversial figures had to answer. That comment seemed to push Kyle over an edge. Her voice rose as she asked Joy what exactly she was implying, whether Joy was suggesting that Kyle was somehow avoiding real scrutiny, whether Joy thought Kyle was too privileged or too protected to handle tough questions. Joy responded that she wasn't implying anything. She was stating outright that Kyle seemed extremely defensive for someone who claimed to have nothing to hide. Kyle shot back that anyone would be defensive when they were being interrogated on live television by someone who clearly had already made up their mind about them. Joy asked what Kyle thought she had made up her mind about. Kyle said it was obvious that Joy had decided Kyle was dishonest, manipulative, and fake, and that nothing Kyle said would change that perception because Joy wasn't actually listening to the answers. She was just waiting for her next opportunity to attack. The other co-hosts were trying desperately to regain control of the segment. Whoopi said that perhaps they were all getting a bit heated and should take a step back. Sunny suggested that maybe both Kyle and Joy had valid perspectives and that the truth probably lay somewhere in the middle. Sarah asked Kyle about her upcoming projects, trying to steer the conversation towards safer ground. But Joy and Kyle were fully engaged in their confrontation now, and neither seemed willing to back down. Joy said that if Kyle felt attacked, perhaps she should examine why she was so sensitive to basic questions about her behavior. Kyle responded that they weren't basic questions, they were loaded questions, designed to make her look bad no matter how she answered them. Joy then brought up something that had clearly been bothering her throughout the interview. She mentioned that Kyle had built a career on sharing her personal life, on inviting millions of viewers into her world, on monetizing her relationships and her drama. She asked whether Kyle thought it was fair to profit from that exposure, but then complain when people had opinions about what they saw. Kyle's face went red. She said that sharing her life didn't mean she had signed away her right to privacy or dignity, that there was a difference between being a public figure and being public property. Joy asked where Kyle drew that line, because from the outside it seemed very convenient, that Kyle wanted all the benefits of fame without any of the accountability that came with it. Kyle's voice was shaking now, whether from anger or hurt or both. She said that Joy was being incredibly unfair, that Joy was twisting everything she said, that this had stopped being an interview and had become a personal attack. Joy maintained that she was simply holding Kyle accountable, that public figures needed to be able to answer tough questions. That if Kyle couldn't handle this conversation, then maybe she wasn't cut out for the level of fame she had achieved. Kyle asked Joy who she thought she was, what gave her the right to determine whether Kyle deserved her success. Joy responded that she had every right as a journalist and a television host to ask difficult questions, and that Kyle's inability to answer them without falling apart was telling. The word falling apart seemed to strike a nerve. Kyle's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steel. She said she wasn't falling apart. She was standing up for herself against someone who was being unnecessarily cruel. Joy laughed, a short, sharp sound, and said that if Kyle thought this was cruel, she had lived a very sheltered life. Kyle demanded to know what Joy's problem was, why Joy seemed to have such disdain for her, whether this was about something specific or whether Joy just enjoyed making guests uncomfortable. Joy said she didn't have a problem with Kyle personally. She had a problem with people who built careers on manufactured drama and then acted victimized when called out on it. Kyle said that was rich, coming from someone who had made a career out of being controversial and provocative on television. That exchange hung in the air for a moment. Whoopi's eyes widened. Sunny put her hand to her mouth. Sarah looked at the producers off camera as if asking for guidance. Alyssa seemed frozen. Joy's expression hardened. She said that there was a difference between being provocative and being dishonest, that she had always been authentic and upfront about who she was and what she believed. Kyle asked if Joy was calling her dishonest again. Joy said she was calling Kyle's behavior dishonest, that there was a clear pattern of Kyle saying one thing and doing another, of Kyle presenting herself as a victim while actively participating in and often instigating conflict. Kyle stood up slightly in her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She said she wasn't going to sit there and be insulted, that she had come on the show in good faith and this had turned into something completely unacceptable. Joy told Kyle to sit down, that she was being dramatic. Kyle said she wasn't being dramatic, she was being disrespected. Joy said that respect was earned, not demanded, and that Kyle hadn't done anything to earn it. The audience gasped audibly at that. Kyle's mouth opened and closed, seemingly unable to find words. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and furious. She said that Joy was a bully, that this was bullying, that Joy was using her position as a host to attack a guest who couldn't fight back on equal footing. Joy scoffed, saying that Kyle seemed to be fighting back just fine, that if anyone was being a bully, it was Kyle with her victim complex and her refusal to take any responsibility for her actions. Whoopi finally stood up, physically placing herself between Joy and Kyle, saying that they needed to stop, that this had gone too far, but Kyle was beyond listening to mediation. She turned to Whoopi and said that she appreciated the attempt to intervene, but it was too late, that the damage was done, that she had never been treated this poorly on any interview in her entire career. Joy muttered something that sounded like maybe you should have been. Kyle heard it. She whipped back toward Joy and asked her to repeat what she had just said. Joy, louder this time, said that maybe if someone had asked Kyle these questions years ago, she wouldn't have spent the last decade contributing to toxic television that passed itself off as entertainment. Kyle's hands were trembling. She said that Joy had no idea what she was talking about, that the show had helped people, that viewers connected with the real moments, the real friendships, the real struggles. Joy asked what was real about manufactured feuds and scripted confrontations. Kyle insisted that the emotions were real even if some situations were set up. Joy said that proved her point, that Kyle couldn't even keep her story straight about what was authentic and what was produced. Kyle said she was done, that she wasn't going to continue this conversation. Joy said that was convenient, walking away when things got uncomfortable. Kyle said no. She was walking away because this had stopped being a conversation and had become harassment. Whoopi placed her hand on Kyle's arm, speaking in a calm, measured tone, trying to de-escalate the situation. She said that everyone needed to take a breath, that tensions were high, that perhaps they could all reset and approach this differently. Kyle pulled her arm away, not aggressively but firmly, and said that there was no resetting this, that Joy had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Joy rolled her eyes visibly and said that Kyle was being overdramatic, that this was exactly the kind of performance she was talking about. Kyle's head snapped toward Joy and she said, her voice deadly quiet, that Joy, calling her authentic emotions a performance, was the most insulting thing that had happened in this entire disaster of an interview. Sarah tried a different approach, speaking directly to Kyle and saying that she understood Kyle felt attacked, that the conversation had definitely become more intense than anyone had anticipated, and that if Kyle wanted to take a moment off camera to collect herself, they could make that happen. Kyle shook her head, saying that taking a moment wouldn't change anything, that the words had been said, that Joy had made it crystal clear what she thought of Kyle and her career and her character. Joy interjected, saying that she had made clear what she thought of Kyle's behavior on television, not of Kyle as a person, and that Kyle's refusal to see that distinction was part of the problem. Kyle laughed bitterly and said that was a convenient semantic game, that you couldn't separate someone's behavior from who they were, that attacking her actions was attacking her. Joy leaned back in her chair and said that if Kyle genuinely believed that, then she had a fundamental misunderstanding of accountability. She said that good people sometimes did questionable things, and being a good person meant being willing to acknowledge those things and grow from them, not doubling down and playing the victim when confronted. Kyle's voice cracked as she responded, saying that she had acknowledged her mistakes countless times, that she had apologized when appropriate, that she had tried to learn and do better, but that none of that seemed to matter to Joy, who had decided Kyle was a villain and was determined to prove it. Joy said that if multiple people over multiple years kept having the same complaints about Kyle's behavior, maybe the problem wasn't everyone else. That statement seemed to be the final straw. Kyle stood up fully from her chair, the microphone attached to her clothing still connected. Whoopi immediately reached out, asking Kyle to please sit down, saying they could work through this. Kyle said there was nothing to work through, that she had tried to engage in good faith, that she had answered questions, that she had defended herself, and that nothing was good enough for Joy. Joy said that Kyle had deflected and made excuses, but hadn't actually taken responsibility for anything. Kyle's voice rose as she said that Joy wasn't looking for responsibility. Joy was looking for a confession, for Kyle to prostrate herself and admit to being everything Joy had already decided she was. Alyssa stood up as well, moving around the table toward Kyle, speaking softly and saying that maybe everyone should take a beat, that emotions were running high on all sides. Kyle told Alyssa that she appreciated the concern, but this wasn't about emotions running high. This was about being ambushed on live television by a host who clearly had an agenda. Joy called out that the only agenda was getting honest answers, and if that felt like an ambush to Kyle, it said more about Kyle than it did about the questions. Kyle turned back to face Joy fully and said that Joy was a hypocrite, that Joy had spent years on this very show, being provocative and controversial and saying things that hurt people, and yet somehow Joy thought she had the moral high ground to judge Kyle for participating in reality television. Joy's expression shifted from confrontational to coldly angry. She said that there was a difference between expressing opinions on political and social issues and creating fake drama for entertainment value. Kyle said that Joy's opinions had real consequences for real people, that Joy had been criticized many times for going too far, for being too harsh, for not considering the impact of her words. Joy said that she stood behind everything she had ever said on this show, that she had never pretended to be something she wasn't, and that she had never asked for sympathy when people disagreed with her. Kyle said that was exactly what she was doing to Kyle right now, refusing to extend any sympathy or understanding, holding Kyle to standards that Joy didn't hold herself to. Sunny stood and joined Whoopi and Alyssa, the three of them forming a sort of barrier between Kyle and Joy, though both women continued to direct their comments at each other around the other hosts. Sunny said that clearly this conversation had touched on some very sensitive topics for both of them, that maybe the best thing would be to agree to disagree and end the segment. Kyle said she was more than happy to end the segment, that she had wanted to end it several minutes ago, but that she wasn't going to agree to disagree because that implied there were two equally valid perspectives here, and there weren't. Joy asked what that meant. Kyle said it meant that Joy had been unfair, unkind, and unprofessional, and that Kyle wasn't going to pretend otherwise just to make everyone comfortable. Joy stood up then too, saying that she had been doing her job, asking the questions that needed to be asked, and that if Kyle couldn't handle that level of scrutiny, she shouldn't put herself in the public eye. Kyle said that scrutiny was one thing, but what Joy had done was something else entirely. It was a personal attack disguised as journalism. Joy said that Kyle throwing around words like attack and bullying diminished those terms for people who actually experienced them. Kyle's eyes flashed and she said that Joy didn't get to tell her what her experience was, that she knew what she had just been through, and it was absolutely an attack. Whoopi raised her voice, something she rarely did, and said that they were going to take a commercial break right now, no discussion. She looked directly at the camera and said they would be right back. But Kyle was already moving. She reached down and unclipped her microphone, the action decisive and final. Sarah asked what she was doing. Kyle said she was leaving, that she wasn't going to stand there for one more second. Joy said that, of course, Kyle was leaving, that running away was easier than facing the truth. Kyle stopped moving for just a moment and turned to look at Joy. She said, quietly but clearly enough for the microphones to pick up, that the only truth here was that Joy Behar was a miserable person who got her kicks from tearing other people down, and that Kyle felt sorry for her. The studio went silent. Joy's face flushed deep red. She opened her mouth to respond, but Kyle had already turned away, handing her microphone to a producer who had rushed onto the set. Whoopi was saying Kyle's name, asking her to wait, to please not leave like this. But Kyle kept moving toward the edge of the set, toward the stairs that led down to the studio floor. Joy called after her, saying that walking off proved everything Joy had said about her, that Kyle couldn't handle being challenged. Kyle paused at the top of the stairs, shook her head, and descended quickly. The camera followed her movement, capturing her walking across the studio floor, past stunned crew members, toward the exit. And then Kyle was gone, through the studio door, out of frame. The camera cut back to the remaining hosts at the table. Joy had her arms crossed, her expression defiant. Whoopi looked directly at the camera and said they were going to take that break now. The most explosive walk-off in recent View history had just happened, captured on live television for everyone to see. Joy and Kyle had both said things that couldn't be taken back. Accusations had been made, insults had been hurled, and in the end, Kyle had made the choice to remove herself rather than continue to engage. So what do you think? Was Joy out of line with her questioning? Or was she just doing her job? Did Kyle overreact by walking off? Or was leaving the only reasonable response to being treated that way? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any future coverage of this story as it continues to develop.